Should be live.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second Harvesting Solutions webinar. We will get started in just a couple minutes, but if you have any questions to start, go ahead and put them in the comment section, and we will be reviewing those after the presentation today. So again, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining us here this afternoon. Harvesting Solutions is an opportunity for us as Farm Bureau to bring our members together to talk about challenges that we are facing here in Minnesota. And we call it Harvesting Solutions because we want to brainstorm ways that Farm Bureau can be part of the answer or the solution. So today our topic is infrastructure, and specifically covering rural roads and bridges. And a reminder, if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, to please just comment on Facebook and we will get to those at the end. Our speaker today is Graham Berg-Moberg, who is an attorney at the Minnesota Association of Townships. He works with the state on issues facing townships, particularly including transportation. Before joining the Township Association, he was a prosecutor in rural Faribault County. So we welcome Graham today, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Pam, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to folks here. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared here, and we'll get moving. All right. Okay, can everybody see you okay? All right. My name is Graham Berg-Moberg. I am an attorney, God forgive me, and I am with the Township Association. As Pam said, I like to joke that my day job is teaching very small towns how not to accidentally commit crimes. But among the hats that I wear is I go up to the legislature, and for the Township Association, I tend to talk specifically about transportation issues affecting townships, which, it's not a perfect one-to-one for rural Minnesota. We are overwhelmingly, as a unit of government, we are the ruralist unit of government there is. We have a couple of members in the Twin Cities, but that's basically it. So let's start talking about the big picture here. So for the state as a whole, Minnesota has one of the largest road networks in the entire United States. Now, the chart that you're seeing there is from 2019, but I can tell you I've taken a look at this thing every year and it hasn't really changed much. As you can see, it'll depend on who's doing the counting and what criteria they're potentially using, but we tend to end up somewhere around fourth in total road miles in the entire country. Which is kind of wild because we don't fund it at anywhere near that level. So these numbers are sort of back in the napkin numbers. Don't hang your hat on them if you want, but it's sort of just to give you a sense of what our peers in terms of road miles are doing with their money. Now, in general, the infrastructure in this state is aging. A lot of it was built some time ago. Of course, our population has been increasing. There's been more freight moving on our roadways with heavier vehicles, and the system is just not really being funded at levels that are sustainable in the long term. So safety has been a growing concern. These numbers come from the Minnesota Transportation Alliance here, but from 2019 to 2023, we're looking at about 2,000 fatalities on Minnesota roadways, and in terms of economic damage to the state, we're looking at about $5.2 billion in 2023 alone. That's downstream of crashes. That's not just deaths. That's all costs considered. The Minnesota State Highway Investment Plan estimates that there's a funding gap for the trunk highway system specifically of about $17 billion for the next 20 years. And comparing total needs to anticipated revenues required to meet performance targets on even the local system for those who receive HUTDF funding, that's estimated at about 18.7. So that number comes from MnDOT. So we're looking at just shy of 40 for the next 20-ish years, more or less. Now that, to be very clear, is for the whole system, nuts to soup to nuts, everything included. For townships specifically, and this one, of course, is a pretty reliable indicator, pretty close indicator of what the rural system specifically is looking at. The numbers look a little bit more like this. So we have specifically the most road miles of any unit of government in the whole state. So it's about 40%, 41%, depending on who's doing the counting, depending on what criteria they're using. I like to, my little sort of back of the napkin estimate is it's about 55,000 miles, one way or another. This, of course, includes that critical first mile for agriculture. This is something that you folks know better than anybody, frankly. We are the guys who are supposed to maintain that first mile from the field to wherever it is that you end up going. And the state spends on us, depending on how you count, around $42 million annually in terms of support. Now here, this particular chart is from MnDOT, and it'll give you a sense of how many miles we have versus how many vehicle miles traveled, that is how often somebody's traveling on the road. So we have the most amount of mileage, but we don't particularly have well-traveled roads. Though, of course, they are critical for things like agriculture, for things like, emergency services in rural areas, for things like getting kids to school, and, just for getting Minnesotans to the lakes and the nature preserves that they are accustomed to as citizens of this state. Now, on top of that, we maintain around 6,000 bridges. Again, varies depending on who's doing the count and stuff like culverts. Sometimes legally counts as a bridge for state law purposes. If it's a culvert that is longer than 10 feet, it technically is a bridge. That's how you end up with such a wildly large number. But ballpark back to napkin math here is about 400 of these are on the deficiency list. That is, they are in need of replacement pretty soon, and they are becoming a safety hazard. So this is who we are, at least financially speaking. So these numbers come from the Office of the Minnesota State Auditor, and it just gives you a sense of how much we control as a unit of government. It's about $400 million in 2022. 2022 is the last available number. Of that, we spent about $380 million in 2022, and the vast majority of that, as you can see, is on that road and bridge number, 60.5%. So that works out to about $280 million. Now, bridges have sort of traditionally been, I don't want to call them a bright spot exactly in the transportation firmament for townships, but they have been under control up until fairly recently. Unfortunately, inflation of the last couple of years has hit us particularly hard in this specific area. Now, this doubling number that you're seeing on your screen there, that's not coming from me. That's coming from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. In the year 2022 by itself, the average cost of a bridge in this state doubled. It doubled. And it has continued to go up since then. Now, this problem got so bad that the Special Town Bridge Account, which, to be clear, is not the whole amount of money that the state gives us for town bridges, but it is a sort of a critical piece of the funding puzzle. This thing was spent out in 2025 in May. They ran into an actual zero. Now, since the legislature has sort of given us a little bit of a top up there, we'll get into it a little bit later. But just so you know, we were looking at a particularly dire funding situation. So giving you a sense of how big we are compared to our sister units of government. So in the same year, 2022, cities had about $7 billion. They spent about 22% of it on roads. Counties had about $8.8 billion, and they spent a little bit more than that, 20% on roads. So we are the smallest unit of government. We're the most voter focused. We're also the fiscally responsible children, apparently, since we are the only ones whose revenue is slightly larger than our expenditures. So good job, membership. But we're also, just the unit of government that has sort of the weakest fiscal legs to be supporting all of this infrastructure. Now, all of this has sort of come together in the last couple of years to be pretty dire, frankly. Now, this is not a normal story, the story that I'm about to share here, but it is a story that's actually true. So in 2022, Cass County turned back portions of County Roads 132, 133, and 134 to a township called Lima Township. Now, the expense to maintain those roads, black tar roads, they were county roads, they were quite a bit more expensive than things that our membership usually maintains. The expense of one of these was more than the annual levy. So the township itself actually voted to dissolve in 2023 because they simply couldn't afford the road network that they were responsible for at this point. Now, that's not a normal outcome, of course, but it is something that we like to make a point of raising anytime we're having this discussion because, hey, look, at some point fiscal obligations and revenues have to be brought into alignment. Otherwise bad stuff starts to happen. So bottom line, in terms of where we are right now, Minnesota has one of the largest road networks in the country. Townships are responsible for a plurality of that, about 40%. We spend about $229 million on roads and bridges, and the state contributes about 40. So for most of that mileage, the state's plan is basically we're going to put this on the back of local taxpayers, and we're going to put it on the back of local taxpayers that are in the smallest and most rural communities and have, proportionally the least help. So we are. It's not a rosy long-term picture. I guess I'd put it that way. Township Association takes the view that sustainable funding at the state level would look more like $100 million. Right now, it's around 40. So that's kind of where we were at walking into the 2025 session. But so this is kind of what happened in the 2025 session. So for folks who are paying attention, we ended up with about a $6 billion deficit. Again, I don't want to get too hung up on the details of these numbers, but that's just sort of the number that ended up getting bandied about. Nevertheless, I gotta say, things didn't turn out nearly as bad as they could have. So the general fund targets that we were looking at was about 130, so it's 115 in cuts for fiscal year 26 and 27, and 133 million in cuts for 28 and 29. Now, the legislature mostly did this through cuts to Metro Transit, Greater Minnesota Transit, and then reductions in auto parts sales tax, and or rather changing its dedication structure. Now, this was partially compensated by additional taxes and fees to electric vehicles. So the law, specifically for folks who are interested in the details, if you want to pull it yourself, what you're looking for is Chapter 8 of 2025's first special session. So per MnDOT, we ended up as rural Minnesotans, as townships specifically, we ended up being held mostly harmless, I guess I would say. So there's a tiny increase, $180,000 roughly next year, and then a pretty small decrease, $400,000 in 2029. So compared to what happened to our friends at the metro counties, we basically got away unscathed. Now, excuse me, that was before the bonding bill. So what we're talking about here is Chapter 15 of Special Session 2025, where the legislature did borrow some additional funds to potentially make good some of those gaps. So there's an additional $47 million for the local road improvement program, with specifically $5 million set aside for townships, and then additional $31 million for the local bridge replacement program. That's what we were talking about earlier on in the session. Now, we really appreciate the additional money. However, it's worth bringing up that the fact that they chose to do this through LRIP has consequences. So for those of you who aren't aware, local road improvement program it's a grant program. It provides funding assistance to various levels of government. So federally recognized tribes, counties, cities, townships, the whole 9 yards. But because it is a grant program and it's not simply being pushed through the ordinary funding mechanisms, that has some nasty follow-on implications, at least from the perspective of rural Minnesota, I think. One of the big ones is that we have to develop an application. Now, from the perspective of someplace like, Minneapolis, someplace like, Rochester, folks that have a big enough budget to have engineers permanently on staff, they've got the staff to just kind of, they were paying them anyway, might as well throw in an application and see what happens. For us, this can be a pretty big burden. You've got to hire somebody in order to put together one of these things. Now, in addition, there's a number of just sort of small ball little barriers to this thing being a practical solution that I think are worth raising. One of them being that townships require county sponsorship. So if you've got a bad relationship with your local county, that can become a problem. And then, of course, appropriately, from the state's perspective, only certain projects are eligible. So, you've got to be a road of regional significance, for example. You've got to have a specific safety issue. You've got to have something like that. It's not for any project. So it's not, this is a bit of a Band-Aid more than a real sustainable solution. Now, in particular, the ways that we think that this tends to disadvantage rural communities are kind of like this. So these are the criteria specifically from the latest documentation issued by the Department of Transportation. So these are the criteria for applying to this thing. So regional significance, naturally, a city and a county is going to have more roads of regional significance than a township. The more rural you are, the less regionally significant you are, just by virtue of the fact that more people are elsewhere, right? And so you're sort of structurally disadvantaged that way. They sort of double up on this a little bit by including the number of persons positively impacted by this project. Of course, smaller communities are always going to be at something of a disadvantage if that's going to be one of the criteria here. Now, I will say that our partners at the Department of Transportation are aware of these structural barriers and have taken steps to try to correct them or mitigate them. So in general, we tend to compete like for like. There's a city tranche, there's a county tranche, and there's a township and tribe tranche. So it's not like we're competing against Hennepin County in a direct way. Nevertheless, particularly from the perspective of rural Minnesota, this is just one of those things that's a bit of a problem, frankly. We appreciate the additional dollars, but at the end of the day, it's not really a solution to the underfunding of this system. And the other big piece of this is that it's inconsistent, right? If you're trying to plan your community development, if you're trying to make sure that you've got a sustainable way to make sure your produce can get to market for the next generation, this ain't the way to go. Numbers up there are also from INDOT's latest publication. As you can see, it just changes year on year. It sort of depends on the fiscal situation. The legislature is not committing to this in a permanent way. So you can't plan assuming these dollars will be available. That said, this year it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Gotta say, it was, from the township transportation perspective, it was okay. I was fully expecting to have some pretty nasty cuts when those budget numbers came back, and that just didn't happen. So thanks to the legislature for taking care of rural Minnesota, at least in that sense. Okay. Now, Pam said specifically, one of the things that I was supposed to focus on here is what rural Minnesotans can potentially do if you're interested in helping out townships to sort of manage these issues. And I know it sounds a little hokey and it sounds a little silly, but the truth is, get involved. The most effective thing that you can do, if you've got 10 minutes, just call a legislator. Write an email, doesn't matter. Get your state senator, your state representative, your U.S. federal House member, your U.S. federal senator. Tell them that you care about this. Tell them that this issue is affecting you. Tell them that you would like to see it solved. I can tell you, as somebody who has been in some of those meetings with legislators, I can talk to them blue in the face. They do not care. The only time they care is when they think that I am representing a meaningful constituency somewhere out there, somebody who actually will vote on this, is paying attention to this particular issue, and will potentially punish them at the ballot box if they ignore it. So you can help that conversation out quite a bit by just spreading a letter. In terms of effort in for result out, that's the way to go. If you're willing to do a little bit more, you can potentially help us document the problem. Now, one of the major problems from my perspective is that I see that there's a fair amount of just incomprehension about rural issues at both the state and federal legislature. We have a lot of folks who are urban and they don't really understand what it's like to live in a town of 200 people. So tell them, show them. If you've got a road that's been rutted for years, if you've got a bridge that's fallen down and you can't get the state to pay for it, take pictures. Take pictures when it's in its roughest state, and send them to me. I will be happy to throw them on a legislator's desk, but send them to a legislator. Let them know how hard it is to get this stuff done. If you want to take a step above that, go to town hall meetings and tell them personally. If you want to take a step above that, consider writing an op-ed, something like that. Documenting the problem is and building energy around this is a big deal, and that is how things get solved, in my experience. And then, of course, for folks who want to go above and beyond, you can always run yourself. We need people who actually understand these issues. And I can tell you, there are a lot of, for township supervisors specifically, getting good folks who are willing to put in the time and willing to serve their communities, it's a big deal. It makes life better for everybody else around you. And you can have a real impact potentially on the road network in your township. So that's my presentation. Hope you liked it. Let's see if there are any questions here.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you for especially those very actionable items at the end. We will give everybody a few seconds here to type any questions that they may have. And while we're giving them time to think, one thing that I thought of is, what would you tell to someone regarding this issue who just doesn't necessarily have the background knowledge or doesn't feel like they have experience with this issue? Like, what would be the main talking point that you would want them to bring to their legislators or other elected officials if they don't feel like they're well versed in this issue?
I think my little bumper sticker there is anybody who eats cares about the first mile from the field, and that means township roads. So making sure that they are in navigable condition, making sure that we can get that food to market, that's a big deal for everybody. And so please do help us take care of that.
We can all get behind that, I think. Right, I'm not seeing anything come in at the moment, but I will give people a few more seconds to type here. All right, one question that we received is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see townships facing when it comes to road maintenance beyond funding? Like, what are the actual issues that they're facing on their roads and bridges?
That's a great question. I think for a lot of folks, if you take funding out of the picture, sort of the next big level of challenge is that, our towns, our rural areas are getting smaller in terms of population over time, and it can be pretty difficult to find folks to actually run the grader or chainsaw the trees off the road or all of that kind of stuff. So getting involved and potentially helping out your local township around those issues, that can be a pretty big deal. We've seen folks in particular just struggle year after year to find plowing services because it's just not being offered anymore. There's just not the population density that there once was. So I would say finding good people is probably the second biggest challenge after road funding for us.
Being that we live in Minnesota, where we see all types of weather all year long, um, is there anything coming down the pike, like road technology wise, that could make our roads last longer into the future?
Yes, actually there is. Now I'm not particularly well versed in this one, but rumors heading around the transportation committee is that there's the U's been working on kind of a sealant type technology that might make gravel roads a little bit more sustainable and cheaper to maintain over the long term. I don't know where that is off the top of my head, but we would certainly be really excited if somebody came up with that next big thing that could help us do this in a more sustainable way over the long term.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we do not have any other questions, so we will not take anyone's time any longer. But thank you again for joining us today, Graham, and thank you to all of our viewers that we had today. Um, As always, the recording of this presentation will be available on our Facebook page and on our website. And we want to make sure everybody marks their calendars for our next Harvesting Solutions on August 18th, again at 2 p.m. And our topic for that one will be rural school funding. So thank you all and have a great week.
Well,